The night my parents threw $100,000 gala to celebrate stripping me of my $15 million inheritance, my father raised his glass and toasted to cutting off the weak link. The room laughed. Champagne flutes clinked under gold chandeliers. My mother, Helena, looked straight at me from the head table, smiling like she'd just won something. What none of them knew was that inside the inner pocket of my charcoal jacket, I wasn't carrying a lawsuit. I was carrying a document that would bankrupt every person in that ballroom before midnight. My name is Damian Cross. 6 months ago, I was vice president of finance at Cross Logistics, the company my grandmother built from 3 delivery trucks into a $4 billion empire. Tonight, I was standing at the back of a rented ballroom at the Whitfield Hotel, watching my own family celebrate my ruin on live local news. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father said into the microphone, his voice smooth, rehearsed, "tonight isn't just a celebration. It's a correction." He let that word sit in the air like it tasted good. For too long, this company carried dead weight disguised as family loyalty. Tonight, we announce the true future of Cross Logistics. He turned and put his hand on my stepbrother Julian's shoulder. Julian smiled the way he always smiled, like a kid who'd never once been told no. "My son, Julian Cross, will be named CEO by year's end." The room erupted in applause. Somewhere near the bar, a reporter from the local business channel adjusted her camera angle. I watched my mother dab at the corner of her eye with a napkin, performing grief for a son she'd forged documents to destroy. 3 weeks earlier, I'd stood in a conference room, while my father read a statement accusing me of misappropriating company funds. $240,000, he claimed, funneled through a shell vendor account with my digital signature on the wire authorizations. I told him I never signed those authorizations. He told me the forensic team disagreed. I asked to see the actual files. He said the board had already voted. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I went home, and I opened the one thing my grandmother left me that nobody else knew existed, a locked drawer in her old office, and a letter that started with the words, "Damian, if you are reading this, they finally showed you who they are." Now, standing in the back of that ballroom in a jacket that cost more than the shame I was supposed to feel, I watched my father wave me forward. "Damian," he said, motioning toward the stage with mock generosity, "why don't you come up here? Say a few words. Show everyone there are no hard feelings." The room turned to look at me. 200 faces. Politicians. Investors. News cameras. My mother's smile widened, expecting silence, expecting me to shrink the way I always had. I walked to the stage. Every step felt slower than the last, the room narrowing until it was just me, the microphone, and the 2 black envelopes sitting flat against my ribs. I could feel my own pulse in my fingertips. Not fear. Something closer to arrival. I reached the podium. My father stepped aside, already smirking, already certain this would end in my apology, my humiliation, my quiet exit through the service doors. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, my voice calm, almost gentle. "I actually do want to say a few words." I reached into my jacket. "Before Julian takes over as CEO," I said, pulling out the first black envelope and holding it up so the cameras could catch it clearly, "I think everyone in this room deserves to know what's actually inside the account my mother forged my signature onto." The applause died in real time. I watched it happen, the exact second 200 smiles turned into 200 question marks. My mother's glass stopped halfway to her lips. "Because it isn't an inheritance surrender document," I continued. "It's a tax guarantor deed for an offshore shell company. And when Helena Cross forged my signature onto it 3 weeks ago, she didn't just steal my shares." I opened the envelope. "She personally guaranteed $40 million in unpaid federal taxes. In her own name." Somewhere behind me, I heard my father's voice crack out my name like a warning. I didn't turn around. Because I hadn't even opened the second envelope yet. For 3 full seconds, nobody in that ballroom moved. Then my mother's glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, and the sound seemed to wake the whole room at once. "Sit down, Damian." My father's voice had lost its polish. "This isn't the time." "You made it the time," I said, still holding the envelope up so the cameras could see it. "You put me on this stage. You told me to say a few words." A reporter near the bar was already talking low into her phone, and I could see the news camera operator zoom in tighter on my mother's face. Helena stood frozen at the head table, one hand pressed flat against the white tablecloth like she needed it to stay upright. "That document is a fabrication," she said, loud enough for the room to hear, but her voice shook on the last word. "It's not," I said. "It's public record. Filed with the Delaware Registry 11 days ago. Your signature, notarized, guaranteeing the tax liability of Meridian Point Holdings, an offshore account that funneled $240,000 through fake vendor invoices. The same $240,000 you accused me of stealing. I let that land." "You didn't frame me for theft," I said. "You used my name to hide your own trail. And when that stopped working, you needed a bigger story, so you forged my signature onto a document surrendering my inheritance, except you grabbed the wrong file from the lawyer's folder. You signed yourself into a $40 million federal tax guarantee." Julian, standing beside my father, had gone pale under the stage lights. He looked at Helena, then at Victor, like a kid realizing the adults in the room had no idea what they were doing either. "This is a private family matter," my father said, stepping toward the podium, his hand rising like he might actually take the microphone from me. "We are not discussing internal business disputes in front of press." "You invited the press," I said. "You wanted cameras here. You wanted witnesses to my humiliation. I'm just giving them a better story." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Somewhere near the back, I heard someone say the words, 40 million, like they were tasting them. My father reached the podium and gripped the edge of it, leaning close enough that only I could hear him. "Whatever game you think you're playing, Damian, you will lose. I built this company. I can bury this in lawyers before the sun comes up." "You didn't build this company," I said quietly. "Grandma Evelyn did. You just inherited it. And she knew exactly what you'd do with it if she ever gave you the chance to touch mine." Something shifted in his face. A flicker. The first real crack I'd seen in him all night. "She's dead," he said. "Whatever sentimental nonsense you're about to pull, it doesn't change anything." "It already has," I said, and I reached into my jacket for the second envelope. The room had gone dead silent now, the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind where 200 people are holding their breath at the same time. My mother had sat back down, her hand still shaking around her napkin. Julian had stopped smiling entirely. 3 years ago, I said, before her heart gave out, Grandma Evelyn came to me. Not to my father. Not to Julian. To me. She told me she'd watched Victor circle this company for a decade like a man waiting for her to die so he could finally spend it. And she told me she wasn't going to let that happen quietly. I opened the second envelope. She set up something called a dead man's audit trust. A legal instrument tied to 60% of the controlling shares of Cross Logistics. It has one trigger condition, and only one. I looked directly at my father now. If any direct heir is disinherited or removed from the company through fraudulent means, those shares are automatically surrendered, not to another family member, not to the board, but to a federal forensic audit, administered jointly by the IRS and the Federal Fraud Division. Victor's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. That's impossible, Helena said, but it came out thin, more question than statement. It's already filed, I said. It's already active. The moment Victor announced my removal from the board 3 weeks ago, the trigger activated. You didn't disinherit me tonight. I folded the envelope closed. You handed 60% of this company directly to federal investigators. 3 weeks ago. Without knowing it. For a moment, nobody spoke. The band that had been quietly playing background music near the far wall had stopped entirely, the musicians frozen mid-note, watching like everyone else. Then, from the double doors at the back of the ballroom, I heard them open. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I already knew who was walking in, because I was the one who'd made the call 3 hours earlier, right before I put on this jacket. My father's eyes moved past me, toward the entrance, and whatever color had been left in his face drained out completely. Victor Cross, a voice said behind me, calm, unhurried, carrying easily across the silent room. Helena Cross. My name is Agent Marcus Vance, Federal Fraud Division. I have some questions I'd like to ask you both, and I'd like to ask them now, in front of everyone who came here tonight to watch you celebrate. My mother's champagne glass, the one she hadn't dropped, slipped out of her hand next. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than grief standing in that ballroom. I felt my grandmother standing right beside me, exactly the way she said she would be. Agent Vance crossed the ballroom floor without hurrying, 3 other agents fanning out behind him in dark suits that didn't match the gala's dress code at all. Cameras that had been filming my father's victory speech 20 minutes earlier were now filming something else entirely, and none of the reporters were bothering to hide their excitement. Mr. Cross, Vance said, stopping a few feet from my father, we've been building this case for the last 11 days, since the Meridian Point filing came across our desk. Mr. Damian Cross reached out to our office this afternoon, and gave us confirmation of tonight's event location. We appreciate the timing. You can't do this here, my father said, but even he seemed to hear how weak it sounded, surrounded by 200 witnesses and a room full of cameras that had already caught everything. Actually, Vance said, a public forum works in our favor. Fewer allegations of tipped evidence later. He turned to Helena. Mrs. Cross, I have a warrant here for the freeze of all accounts associated with Meridian Point Holdings, as well as personal accounts linked under your name as guarantor. I'd like you to come with one of my agents. I didn't sign anything, Helena said, her voice climbing. This is my son's doing. He's always hated this family, he's always wanted. Mom. Julian's voice cut through, quiet, but it stopped her. He was staring at her now like he'd never actually seen her before. You told me you fixed the paperwork yourself. You told me 2 weeks ago in the kitchen. You said Damian wouldn't even notice which file he signed because he trusted the lawyers. The room went very still. Julian, Helena started. You said it like it was smart, Julian said. Like it was clever. You made it sound like a business decision. I watched my little brother's face, not so little anymore, 26 years old and standing in a $3,000 suit bought with money that was never really his, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something other than golden child confidence. I saw a kid realizing he'd been handed a crown built out of someone else's stolen inheritance. Julian, be quiet, my father snapped, but Vance was already writing something down. Mr. Cross, Vance said to my father, would you like to explain your role in the vendor invoice scheme tied to the $240,000 originally attributed to your son? I have no comment, my father said, straightening his jacket like it might still save him. My attorney will be handling all further communication. That's your right, Vance said. Though I'll mention, for the record, we already have the internal emails between you and your CFO discussing how to, and I'm quoting here, route the invoice trail toward Damian's login credentials before the board meeting. Emails your CFO handed over voluntarily 2 days ago, once we explained his own liability. My father's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle jump along his cheek. 2 agents moved toward my mother. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all night, the performance finally gone from her face. You planned this, she said. Not a question. No, I said. Grandma Evelyn planned this. 3 years ago. Before she died, before any of this started, she sat me down and told me exactly what you and Dad would do the moment you thought you could get away with it. I just followed her instructions. She never trusted us, Helena said, and for a second there was something almost raw underneath the anger. Even when your father took over as CEO. She never once trusted us. She trusted me, I said. That was the whole point. An agent took my mother gently by the arm. She didn't fight it, though her eyes stayed on me the entire time, wide and unreadable, until she was led toward the ballroom doors. My father lasted a few seconds longer, still trying to negotiate, still trying to find the angle, the way he always did in board meetings when a number didn't go his way. Vance, be reasonable. We can discuss the terms of a voluntary interview. There's no need for this to happen in front of. His knees buckled mid-sentence. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, just a small stagger, his hand grabbing for the podium and missing it. Then he went down fully, collapsing onto the stage floor as gasps rippled through the crowd and someone screamed for a doctor. Vance dropped immediately to check his pulse, waving over one of the hotel's medical staff stationed near the entrance for exactly this kind of event. I didn't move. I stood at the edge of the stage, watching my father, the man who'd built his entire identity on control, on being the one who decided who mattered and who got cut off, lying on the floor of a ballroom he'd rented to celebrate my destruction, while paramedics pushed through the crowd toward him. Julian grabbed my arm. Is he going to be okay? I don't know, I said honestly. Damian. His voice cracked. I didn't know. About the invoices, about Mom forging your name, I swear I didn't know any of it. I looked at him for a long moment. 26 years old, raised inside a family that had taught him nothing except how to accept things he hadn't earned. I believe you, I said. That's actually the saddest part. The paramedics got my father onto a stretcher. He was conscious, mumbling something about lawyers, about board votes, about numbers that no longer belonged to him. As they wheeled him past me, his eyes found mine one last time. This isn't over, he said, barely above a whisper. It already is, I said. You just haven't seen the last envelope yet. 3 weeks passed before I saw any of them again. The Gala had made every local news cycle for 4 straight days, then jumped national once a financial reporter connected Meridian Point Holdings to 2 other shell companies under investigation in a separate case out of Delaware. By the time the story died down, Cross Logistics had a court-appointed monitor overseeing every transaction. My father was out on bail awaiting formal charges for wire fraud and conspiracy, and my mother had accepted a plea deal that traded a lighter sentence for full cooperation against him. Julian called me 11 times that first week. I didn't answer any of them. I spent those 3 weeks the way Grandma Evelyn would have wanted me to, in the office she'd left me the keys to, going through the dead man's audit trust paperwork with the federal auditors, verifying every transaction, watching the 60% controlling share transfer complete exactly the way she'd designed it 7 years ago, back when she first saw what her son was capable of and decided to build a trapdoor under his feet. On the 22nd day, I finally called Julian back. We met at a diner 2 blocks from the old Cross Logistics headquarters, not the executive floor, not anywhere near a boardroom. He looked different, thinner, tired, dressed in a plain gray sweater instead of the tailored suits he used to live in. I got a job, he said, before I'd even sat down. Not here. A logistics startup in Denver. Entry level. Warehouse operations. That's a long way down from CEO, I said. Yeah, well. He turned his coffee cup slowly on the table. Turns out I was never actually qualified to be CEO. I just had the right last name at the right time. He looked up at me. I keep thinking about what you said. At the gala. That you believed me, and that was the saddest part. I meant it. I know, he said. That's what made it worse. We sat in silence for a while. It wasn't warm, wasn't healed, but it wasn't hostile either, just 2 people who used to share a last name figuring out what, if anything, was left between them. I'm not going to pretend we're close, I said finally. But you didn't forge anything. You didn't steal anything. You were just raised by people who taught you that things get handed to you if you smile at the right moment. That's not a crime. It's just sad, like I said. What happens to the company, he asked. The audit's almost done, I said. No criminal liability on the business itself, Grandma structured it clean specifically so the company would survive even if the people running it didn't. The board's reinstating me as controlling shareholder next month. Full oversight, new compliance structure, new CFO. Real one this time. And Dad. Arraignments in 2 weeks. Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction. His lawyers are already floating a deal, but the federal prosecutor doesn't sound interested in floating anything. 40 million in unpaid taxes tends to make people less flexible. And Mom? 18 months, most likely, with cooperation credit. She's already given them everything on Dad's side of it. Meridian Point, the fake vendor accounts, all of it. I paused. She asked to see me before her sentencing hearing. Are you going to go? I don't know yet, I said, and that was the truth. Some nights I hated her enough that the answer was easy. Other nights I remembered her holding my hand in a hospital waiting room, when I was 9 years old and broke my arm, and the answer got complicated again. Grief doesn't clean itself up just because the person earned it. Julian nodded slowly, like he understood that better than I expected him to. I'm not asking you to forgive them, he said. I'm not even asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm not going to pretend none of it happened. I'm not going to rebuild some version of this family where we all just move on like it was normal. That's more self-awareness than I thought you had, I said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, there was something close to a real smile between us. He left for Denver 2 days later. We don't talk often. Maybe once a month, short calls, nothing deep. It's not a relationship rebuilt, it's the outline of one, waiting to see if either of us actually wants to fill it in. The company reinstated me as controlling shareholder on a Tuesday morning in March, in the same conference room, where my father had once read a statement accusing me of stealing $240,000 I never touched. I sat at the head of that table for the first time, looking at a room full of board members who, 6 months earlier, had voted unanimously to strip me of everything. Nobody mentioned that vote. Nobody had to. They all understood exactly what kind of chair I was sitting in now, and exactly why. Before the meeting started, I opened my grandmother's old desk drawer one more time, the same drawer where I'd found her letter 3 years ago, and I read the last line of it again, the one I'd read so many times the paper had started to soften at the fold. Asterisk, they will try to make you small, Damian, because your size reminds them of what they never earned. Don't shrink. Just wait. The math always tells the truth eventually. Asterisk. She was right. It did. I closed the drawer, straightened my jacket, a different one now, no envelopes hidden inside it, because I didn't need to hide anything anymore, and I called the meeting to order.